And the people were different. The people were different. They were much more psychic, in tune with the nature, the elements, energetically based, a different time. Now we're very intellectual, we're very developed mentally, very intellectual. But these teachings of the ancient yoga, they come from a different type of consciousness. So they're not so easy to understand. And for that reason, they weren't the yogas that were revealed to the world. Back in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, when yoga started to come out to the world, when the masters in India started to share some of these systems of yoga with the world, they didn't reveal the Kundalini yoga. So we came to yoga with the physical and the mental. And there was a good reason for that. It's that it doesn't give an intellectual experience. It's very hard to understand these ancient yogas from Tantra through the intellect. We can't understand them through modern science, through modern technology, because that's a type of power that relates to the material dimension. But the tantric yogas relate to the psychic, to the spiritual, and it's all in symbols and in sounds. And so when we try to understand that through the intellect, when we read the texts, we do gain something, but not a lot. Not a lot. It's really once we enter this field within us and we start practicing the yoga that it starts to make a sense to us. So it's a very different type of power. Kundalini yoga is very powerful. So it wasn't easily revealed. It was kept quite secret, and it was kept intact. So in this tradition, we've been very lucky to have had Swami Satyadharma. We can say over the last decade, she really unfolded Kundalini yoga, and she unfolded it in a very authoritative way, in a very clear way, and in a way that wasn't commercial, that was there to be shared with people that were sincere in the right kind of environment, So I'm very humbled to be here with you today in a place such as this, with people such as you, where we can start to unfold just a little bit of the Kundalini yoga. You see, we're all at the very beginning. Even if we've been practicing it for some time, we're still at the beginning. So to understand this purpose of Kundalini yoga, we should have an understanding a little bit about the philosophy of Tantra. And the philosophy of Tantra in relation to evolution is very different to what we've been educated on, particularly in the West. It's very different. So we have been educated that humans evolved from insects. Yes, please sit comfortably. We will be doing meditation, so put the legs out, relax, be at ease. Take your chance now to stretch the legs. So human evolution, it's said that we come from the apes, the insects, the monkeys, the apes. Tantra is very different to that. Tantra says that we are divine, luminous, God, that we are pure spirit, pure soul, and that we have evolved into the material. So this is a really important thing to get, otherwise it doesn't make so much sense. So to understand that we have come from the divine and evolved into the material, that we are pure spirit, which is what? In Tantra, pure spirit is a combination of universal energy and universal consciousness entwined always together. And that's the universal soul that has become into the material dimension. So from spirit to matter. Now the yogas are there in Tantra to begin the process of coming from matter back to spirit. This is the purpose of Tantra, and this is the purpose of yoga too. Actually, if you reflect on all of the systems of yoga, what they're really doing are relating to these two principles within us, consciousness and energy. Even in the very basic beginner's class, you instruct a student to, flex their feet up and down, and then to pause and to notice any sensation, any energy, any sensation, any feeling, to perhaps reflect on the state of the mind. Was there an effect? So even at that level, we're working with these two principles. These are the two principles of yoga, all of the yogas. Do something, feel the experience. What is the effect on the mind, on the consciousness? So this is the essence of tantra, working with the energy and the consciousness. And tantra, in the word itself, gives the whole meaning of the philosophy. So tantra, two roots, tan, which comes from tanoti, that means to expand. Tra, which comes from triety, that means liberation. So expand what? Liberate what?
Consciousness.
Expand the consciousness, liberate the energy. Expand the consciousness, liberate the energy. Union. So that's the purpose of yoga as well. We may not have looked at it in that light, or we may not be so aware of it because there's so many other benefits along the way, side benefits. Relaxation, mental capacities, physical health, psychic abilities, all the side benefits. But the purpose of yoga is to liberate the energy, expand the consciousness, to unite with spirit, to unite matter with spirit. So now we start to get the idea that it's a lot to understand, it's a lot to explore, it's a lot to take in. We can spend lives and lives and lives understanding our relationship with the material, with the physical, and our relationship with the divine, with the spirit. So Tantra says that by focusing on the energy, liberating the energy, there is an expansion of consciousness. And Tantra says that you can sit for 1,000 years in meditation and get nowhere if you were to focus on the mind and the consciousness itself, and get nowhere. Now there are some beings, of course, that have come in such a purified state, their chitta, their karma, their samskara is so purified that they have that ability. And when they do expand their consciousness, it automatically liberates the energy, so they affect each other. But Tantra focuses on the energy, on liberation of energy in order to expand the consciousness. So that's the direction of Tantra, and it's the direction of yoga too. So what does it mean in practical terms? Because in our first workshop, we spoke in depth about creation and about the Kundalini being the creative force that brings us into existence. And we spoke about how this force brings us into existence through the evolution of the chakras and the qualities of the chakras, the consciousness and energy of the chakras. We spoke about that. But today I want to talk a little bit more in practical terms, in a bit more of a hands-on way. So when we say liberate the energy, what does that mean? What does that actually mean to us? You see, in Hatha Yoga, the more physical yoga, which has origins in Tantra as well, asana, pranayama, mudra, bandha, but the purpose was purely energetic. So the people from this period, they practiced the asana, the mudra, the bandha. They were totally focused on the energy. The physical was the shell that was there, but they were focused on the energy. But for us, we're focused on the body, purifying the body, balancing the body. But guess what happens? In that practice, you start to experience the energy. Isn't it? You start to feel a movement. You feel a sensation. You feel the movement of energy. You do mula bandh, and suddenly you feel some sensation up here, or you feel the energy flows up, you start to experience the energy. And what is happening when we experience the energy? There's a separation from matter. There's a separation of energy from matter. So this is the beginning of separating, of liberating the energy from matter. And we may just be at the very beginning of attuning to this energetic experience. So Kundalini Yoga is the yoga that focuses on continuing this development and this liberation of energy by waking up this energy, by opening and purifying the chakras. Only then can the Kundalini, this creative force, rise up through the chakras, expand the consciousness, experience the union. So in very simple terms, this is the pathway of Kundalini, is to first begin this separation of energy from matter. Of energy from matter. Do you see? Does that make a sense to you? Am I speaking nonsensical?
Matter is energy.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And you see, from the point of view of Tantra, we spoke about evolution and Tantra saying that we are divine and that we embody the divine. That we embody the divine, that the divine is within us. But you know what happens when we become material, when we come into form? We forget. We forget. Our divinity is reflected in the material. Everything that we do relates to the material, to the physical, to the external. And we spoke about those signs of this force of Kundalini. She deposits the chakras and rests deep down, goes to sleep, and we dream this life. And we spoke about when the Kundalini starts to stir, we start to experience this in our life as seeking something more, something beyond the material, something more than the way that we're currently perceiving life, experiencing life, acting in life. We start seeking more knowledge, spiritual paths, ancient texts, yoga practices, Kundalini workshops. We start trying to find a way to have an inner experience, But you see, because we've taken a birth into the material, they say, have you heard this word Maya? This word Maya? We come across Maya a lot. Illusion. So what does that mean to us? What does it actually mean?
Superficial stuff.
Superficial stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So Maya, they say, is that veil that covers our origin, covers our truth, that keeps us very firmly planted in interacting in this material dimension. Identifying, interacting, and it's only through that liberation of energy, the expansion of consciousness, that the Maya dissolves. So all of our divinity is currently being reflected through to the material. The way that we love people, the way that we're happy when we go out to dinner and we have some time with our beloved, the way that we're excited when we get a new house or we get a promotion. It's all relating to this material dimension, which is reflected in our lower chakras, which we'll talk about a bit later. But this is what they mean by Maya. It's that we come into a certain level of bondage. Now, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean we shouldn't enjoy our life, that we shouldn't be happy when we get the car, that we shouldn't want to succeed in our work, that we shouldn't want to have children or have a home or have stability. No, that doesn't mean there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, those things may improve the more that we start to focus on these other dimensions within. And they may improve. But Maya means that when the Kundalini force brings us into being, into the material, we become bonded. We become a little stuck in the material, in the physical, in the external. So this purpose of Kundalini Yoga is when that energy starts to stir, when we've lived long enough in a certain way, when we want to know more about who it is we really are, and that force within us that brought us into being starts to wake up a bit and look around, then we need a process, we need a map, we need a way. Because these inner dimensions, these higher chakras, are very subtle. They're very subtle, and it's very easy to sort of drift off if you enter into these spaces, to just kind of drift off or get a little bit lost. So yoga provides that clear framework, that pathway that's been preserved by the ancient seers and rishis that have been there before. So it's a pathway for us, and when we follow that pathway, the Kundalini Yoga pathway, we may have different experiences, we may have our own revelations, something that's different to the teaching or the text, but the point is to have an anchor when we enter into these subtle dimensions. See, Kundalini Yoga relates to the psychic field. The psychic field. Not the physical, not even the pranic or the mental. The psychic. So the first thing we have to do is understand this dimension of our being and to have a direct experience of this psychic field. So that takes some time to develop, to come into contact with. So that's the first stage of Kundalini Yoga, is coming into this dimension within us. And you see, the psychic field, it's full of symbols, it's full of sounds. And that's why when we talk about Kundalini Yoga, it's a little difficult to translate, because it is full of symbols, it is full of sounds that don't really make a sense to you until you experience it in your own way and that understanding comes. So this morning, Divyatma, he said that maybe we should do some recording of the meditation practices. And I was a little bit concerned, because at that point I was thinking, what will we talk about today? And all I was seeing was symbols. All I was seeing was symbols, because this is the psychic field of Kundalini Yoga. It really all is encased in symbols. And when you start to explore the ancient texts, the tantric texts, and you come across these symbols and you look at them intellectually, you can make some guesses, you can make some estimations, but it's not until you're in that field these symbols manifest for themselves, and they unfold all of that knowledge. All of that knowledge. So if we were to focus on a particular chakra, in the beginning we're visualizing, we're imagining the symbols that are encased in the teaching, we're imagining. But at some point when that chakra begins to purify and to open, those symbols manifest for themselves. They're there, they're present. This psychic field starts to wake up. And this brings a whole nother dimension, even to the yoga practice that you're doing now. If you enter into that psychic field, well, you might be bending over at Manipur and seeing the Shiva Lingam, and you start to have these symbols and sounds a part of your experience, and a part of experience with others too. With others too. So Kundalini Yoga, we've been talking a bit about the energy and the practices, but I want to mention also this force of Kundalini. We spoke about it a fair bit in the first workshop, but this force of Kundalini is something quite mysterious, quite unknown. So we describe Kundalini as that creative power, that creative force, that force that carries the pure consciousness and energy from the unmanifest dimension. You see, the unmanifest dimension is not nothing. It's not an empty nothing. It's full of potential. Full of potential. And when that unmanifest dimension decides to manifest, It's the force of Kundalini that begins to descend, creating all of the divinities, all of the elemental energies, all of the planes of existence, all of the universes, all of the life forms, right down into the material, And it's that same force of Kundalini that moves back up, bringing the material all the way back up to the spirit, all the way back up. So the yogis, the ancient yogis, have come to understand how Kundalini created us, human beings. You see, when we look outside, we know that there's a life force. We see the nature, we see the energy. Actually, this is all Kundalini. This is all the manifestation of Kundalini. And we may know Kundalini in other terms as Shakti, Mahashakti, Mahaprana, Prakriti. Kundalini. This is all a manifestation of energy. Energy particles taking on different combinations, different formations, coming into matter. And so the yogis have understood that process of how we came into matter through the evolution of the chakras, by making certain deposits of consciousness and energy and the elemental energies that are needed to stay intact, to hold us here. And then the chakras, they close a little. They become a bit dormant. And Kundalini goes to sleep in Muladhara, in our base, which is the earth deposit. Remember, the element of earth is in Muladhara. So we become very earthed, which is important. We're an earth body. We're made of blood and bones, and we're constantly eating, taking in earth. Then it comes out. We're constantly in earth, in mud bodies. And it's very important, it's particularly important when we're starting to approach these higher practices, that we have that ability to remain earthed and grounded until we understand, until we develop awareness, until we're following a bit of a pathway. Because if we don't remain earthed and we move up into these spaces before that purification, before that awareness is developed, we'll have a trip to the psych ward. It happens like that. It happens like that. So it's very important. It's not to say that the material and the lower chakras are bad or their expression is bad. They're very important. They're very important, and we start to work with and purify these lower chakras. And then we start to come into the higher dimensions. And when we do, we have a different experience of life, a different quality of perception, a different understanding. We may do the same things we've always done, but we're becoming more multidimensional. Multidimensional. So I think maybe that's enough talking for now. I don't want to lose you. And it's nice to talk, but really we can't gain so much from talking. It's the practice itself. It's you doing the practice, having your own experience that gives you that understanding and that knowledge. So I'd like to do a meditation practice. You can just stretch your legs out while I talk about the practice and wriggle them around. This practice is, we did do it in our last workshop, and I'd like to do it again just to expand a little bit. And I might just hand these out so you have a little bit of a visual. So can I have one too? You know, we were talking about the liberation of energy, separating energy from matter, but we didn't talk about the expanded consciousness. And that's very important because that's the other side of tantra. So, expanded consciousness that goes along with the liberation of energy, what does that mean? What does it mean to have an expanded consciousness?
In my opinion, I think an expanded consciousness is something that is taken psychically from a realm that none of us are really we're not really familiar with, and it's spontaneous. A spontaneous sort of element that comes into play either through doing the practices or after the practices. I'm not sort of talking from experience, but I've found that in a lot of cases that the expanded consciousness came after the practices were completed, like within the next 6 to 12 hours in some cases, or a certain time of the night when something would wake you, maybe. But
so I think we can all relate a bit to that experience of when you're doing the practices, particularly the dynamic meditation practices focusing on the energy, and then you stop the practice and you experience the space that you're in, the space of the mind, of the consciousness, and you can really feel the effect, isn't it? You can feel the effect of the practice on the mind. Suddenly it's quiet, spacious, steady, full of light. So this is the direct effect of working with the energy. But in terms of the chakras and the creative force of Kundalini, expanded consciousness means, do you remember we spoke about when the creative force first descends and she makes the deposit here at Sahasrara. So Sahasrara actually isn't really a chakra, but Sahasrara is what contains our pure spirit, the one, the universal energy and consciousness. Universal energy and consciousness. And then we spoke about Bindu being the entry point. And when we got to Agya, we spoke about the individual consciousness, which evolves a mind, but the deposit of individual consciousness. And we spoke about the difference of individual consciousness and the universal consciousness is that there's a boundary, and that boundary is knowing. That in the individual consciousness, you can know. You can know all of the levels of your consciousness. But in the universal, there is no knowing. There's no duality. There's no this or that. There's no perceiver. It's just one. So we spoke about the individual consciousness. And you see, we're all functioning in a very ordinary state of consciousness. We are. We may have times of expansion in meditation or in the nature, but generally we're functioning in a very ordinary state of consciousness. So to expand the consciousness, it means to know, to be aware of all of the levels of your consciousness. See, we go to sleep at night, close the eyes, and then what? We don't know. And then maybe we become aware of our dreams and the subconscious activity here and there, or in meditation, we have some awareness of the subconscious. But really, we're just conscious of the conscious. So to expand is to know all of the levels of our individual consciousness. This process has to happen first. For illumination to dawn, for samadhi, for universal union, first we have to understand and be aware of our individual consciousness. We have the unconscious, the conscious, subconscious, the superconscious. We can know the superconscious state within us. So this is what it means to expand the consciousness, to liberate the energy, to expand the consciousness. And yoga provides these conditions, certain atmosphere, that we can start that liberation and expansion. Start to experience more of who it is we are, these dimensions. You see, if illumination was to come now, they say that illumination is like an explosion of light, 1,000 suns. 1,000 suns. Liberated energy, expanded consciousness, illumination dawns like the light of 1,000 suns. So I have trouble just looking at one sun, at one sun. So do you think we're ready for that? That explosion of light, that intensity. So now you see what the purpose of yoga is. To prepare us, to condition us, to expand, to liberate. So this may not happen to us for many lives to come. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But we should know that we are spirit and we've come into a material, physical existence. And that we've come to yoga or we've come to music or to art or whatever it is that gives us more insight to who it is we are. Because we're starting this process of understanding material into spirit. And Kundalini Yoga encapsulates this process through the chakras, through understanding, experiencing the qualities of the chakras, the dimensions of the chakras, the energy and consciousness within the chakras. And when they start to open, wow, everything is there. More than you could dream of. But you know what? You don't care. You don't care because Kundalini, she's coming up. You couldn't care less. You couldn't care less about these potentials, these abilities, all of the things that may unfold. Because that force is stirring and piercing and coming up to unite. So, if we take a look at diagram 1, I just want to have a little vision of this pathway. So the practice that we're going to do is really just to start connecting with this psychic inner space, this space within us. And we're going to be moving up through the chakras in a very simple way. And if some of these names of the chakra, you don't know them or it's new to you, don't worry about that at all. Don't worry about that at all. The practice is quite simple, but it's really to just have an experience, a sensation, a feeling of where the chakras are, and maybe you'll experience a different quality of color, of vibration, of light. We're going to be moving up and down, and this is a foundation practice for Kundalini Yoga, and it's something that we should always come back to and do regularly, because it's connecting us with that psychic field. Anything we do in Kundalini Yoga, if we don't have the ability to come into that space, it's not effective. We're sort of just doing it mentally or intellectually or even pranically. We're not going to have that experience. So we start to become familiar with the space within us and to have an idea of where the chakras are. And the chakras, they're moving so quickly. The vibration and light moving so quickly, they're dynamic, but maybe you don't feel or see that movement because it's so fast. They're a little bit nebulous. So we'll have that experience. Are you ready for that? To come into this psychic space? Because you won't be here. You won't be here. You won't be in outer space though either. You'll be in your inner space. Your inner space. So you can take a few moments to just settle into your position.